Of you have ever had a fear so great, so overpowering, that you thought life would never be the same? How many of you have experienced just itty bitty little small fears? Like, I'm gonna be late for the plane and I'm gonna miss it. Or I'm gonna run out of gas on 99 or 70 right out here in the middle of nowhere land. How many? Oh yeah, we've all had those kind. Or how many of you have had an experience in childhood, 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, that you have that fear? In 7,000 Ways to Listen, book by Mark Nepo, he tells the story of a lady by the name of Lisa, who was severely burned in a gas fire when she was only 9 years old. And the trauma of that experience dominated her whole entire life. She had a constant fear of fire, and if anyone around her left their gas grill going while they were trying to eat, she would begin to sweat and become uncomfortable, and she would have to ask them to go back and turn the gas barbecue off. 30 years later, she woke up one morning and she realized that she had to release this fear that she had of the fire. She knew instinctively that it was going to continue to hold her back in life if she didn't let it go. In order to do this, she went to the local fire department and she asked the fighters if they would set a control fire, and they agreed to do that. And she wore a fire suit that protected her. And they started the fire, and she walked into the middle of the flames. And she stood in the center of these flames, absolutely engulfed by the fire. Initially, her fears began to rise up again. That sweat that always showed up when she was around fire was there trickling down her back. But slowly she began to realize that her fear was melting away. There was a world beyond those flames that were beckoning her, and she opened her palms, and the flames came up through her fingers, and she watched them, and she knew she was safe. They would not and could not burn her this time. And so as she began to walk out of the fire, she could feel the heat as it would separate in front of her as she would walk out. Both her behind, and the cool air began to surround her. She felt her feet. Finally, after feeling cramped within for so very long, with that fear of fire, she began to act. For her, the fire was real, but the new experience of fire completely and totally changed her belief. The fire can be a wound or a fear that keeps burning up within us emotionally. It's not easy to listen for spirit or each other or the voice within, and everything is completely and totally distorted through the flames of fear or past pain. Fear is a disturbing emotion aroused by impending danger, real or imaginary. Something in your environment is happening and your body begins to reject it, fear. And when we experience threatening or fearful psychological situations, our body reacts physically. Psychological professor Joseph Bellata says a part of our brain called the hypothalamus which controls our basic drives like hunger and thirst, sends a signal that activates our sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nerve system releases hormones that allow the body to deal with emergency situations. When fear strikes an individual, a response often called fight, flight, or freeze occurs or shows up in our life. The body begins to prepare, the muscles get ready to fight off or to run from the danger that is there. The heart rate increases faster and faster. The lungs dilate or widen and allow more air to come in for us. The goosebumps rise up on our skin as a defense mechanism, and the digestive system, of all things, shuts down. I wish that would happen more often. A hormone called adrenaline is then released, causing the body to trigger all of these responses. As a police chaplain, I have heard from many police, fire, and EMTs in the debriefing process that those feelings that rise up within, known as fight, flight, or freeze, are very real and occur for them on a regular basis. The active response of fight, flight, or freeze is a carryover from human beings walk the earth with mammoths and saber-toothed tigers, and it was made in order for us to survive. They needed the judgment back then that fight, flight, or freeze would bring in order to survive that saber-toothed tiger or the running mammoth that was coming after them. Recently, as news last fall began to show up for me about the Maui fires, the fear and the trauma I experienced working 30 days on the campfire 5 years ago began to stir up within me. Intellectually, I knew that I was not threatened. My gosh, it was 2,000 to 3,000 miles away. Intellectually, I knew I was okay. I knew this fire was not even close and that I would not be working at this time. Anxiety, however, still came and stayed for a while. Just imagine our men and women in the military that face life-threatening situations every single day of their life. It is no wonder there is this thing called PTSD. Fire, fight, or freeze is an everyday occurrence for them. Fear is a very normal response to a situation that we feel threatened by. In the Atlas of the Heart, Brene Brown, I hope if you haven't heard of her, she's great, and the book, The Atlas of the Heart, is a wonderful book. She states fear arises when we need to respond quickly to physical, psychological danger that is present and imminent. She further talks about fear as a temporary condition that is experienced for just a short period of time. Ernest Holmes puts it more simply: fear, faith negatively applied. 2 Timothy in chapter 1, verse 7 says, "For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and good discipline." Thich Nhat Hanh tells us the only way to erase our fear and be truly happy is to acknowledge our fear and look deeply at its source. Fear can be based on a past experience, a present situation, or even the future. It can be a fear generated from a learned experience in our childhood. My mother was drastically afraid of snakes, and because of a shared experience when I was only 3 years old, I have feared them all of my life. Feared them so much that I can't even see a picture without the sweat starting to collect on my back. The story of Lisa provides us with a perfect example of a past experience that she could not let go of. She kept herself on the hook for over 30 years. Finding yourself facing a bear in the woods can be a present danger that causes fear, or someone who is afraid of public speaking and spend days fearing and worrying about the presentation that they have to make at work. And the only way to look at the source of our fear is to stay present in the moment and begin the journey of letting it go. And by staying in that present moment, because that gives us the courage to face our fears. That is not always easy, bringing ourselves back to the center of our mind, which is right here in the front of our brain. One of the techniques that we teach the police and fire in deep breathing processes is what I call the toe crinkle. Actually, take your feet, put them flat on the ground. I'm going to teach you something here. It's real simple. Go to your right foot first and just crinkle your toes for a couple of seconds. Now move to your left and do the same. And just keep doing this for just about a minute. And what that does for you is it brings you to the front of your brain, and which is the present moment. When we're in fear, fight, or flight, we move to the back of the brain, which is where the hypothalamus is. They found when the major storms hit Haiti that they couldn't reach all the children, and so they taught the children the butterfly simply by taking this and going right and left and right and left. They called it the butterfly, and when the fear would rise up within the children, they would be left, getting the right and left brain to coordinate. Such a simple process, and yet it brings us right back to where we need to be in the present moment. Being centered increases our courage to face our fears and brings calm so that we might listen to our inner voice in this present moment rather than be overtaken by fear. Hema Children, in her book, The Places That Scare You, wrote, "We can let the circumstances of our lives harden us so that we can become increasingly resentful and afraid, or we can let them soften us and be more open to what scares us. We always have this choice." Lisa could have stayed angry and resentful of the people responsible for her burn injuries for the rest of her life. She could have continued to live in constant fear. She didn't, however, when she walked into the fire as an adult with purpose and intent. Lisa let herself stay in the moment, releasing the past. And then she shifted her belief that she had hung on to for over 30 years. The Atlas of the Heart reminds us that when we live in fear and hurt, we move into states of uncertainty and anxiety. We feel overwhelmed and vulnerable. Certainly not how we want to experience life, nor is it a place we want to build a condo and live in. But too often, fear grips us and we find ourselves absolutely paralyzed, on the hook, and unable to move beyond the experience of the crisis. So how do we just come back to that place of center? We can't run around doing a butterfly all day or crinkling our toes 24/7. How do we return to that place of the Christ consciousness that lives within? How do we release the hooks that we've been for years? Almost every source outlined 3 to 20 things that we need to consciously choose to do if we're willing to let go of our fear. I'm going to do all 20. Tom Rutledge outlines 4 processes in embracing fear. He states, the first is to face it and acknowledge it. And we started to do that today in your meditation. We all can do that. That means we stop hiding and cringing or stuffing our fears. It means being still so that you can hear the divine voice within, not just that scary negative voice that sits on your shoulder, chatting away endlessly. Next, we need to explore the fear, the fire that burns within. Too often we stop or attempt to walk away from what is scaring us. In this step, we stop and truly examine our fear. Where did it come from? Why does it bother us so much? When does this fear rise up most often? And sometimes when we can identify the triggers that cause the fear, then we can begin the process of healing. Accepting the fear does not mean we have to agree with it. By accepting it, we can also bless it, as you did this morning. Accepting and blessing is simply a process that can be done anywhere, anytime. As one of my mentors once said, until you can accept the worst, the best will happen. If we're continually focused on keeping something challenging from happening, that generates a fear within or a negative emotion. We are using our energy to prevent something better than coming into our life. After all, whatever we resist will certainly persist and grow stronger within. Whatever you choose to allow in your life, you can change. So the next time a fear rises up within, try the simple love prayer. On the inhale, say, I accept you. And on the exhale, I bless this. I accept this. I bless this. Can we change a fear? Maybe, maybe not. Look at me, I still have a fear of snakes. But through recognition, we can begin to respond to our fear in a more healthy and realistic way. Remember that most of our emotional distress we experience about our fears are the direct result of how we think about ourselves and what is happening in our life. Instead, focus only on the experience or the circumstances in an attempt to bring clarity to that situation. By doing so, we can begin to let ourselves off the hook. We can forgive ourselves. That is so important. Or someone else who may have helped to generate that fear that we're allowing to control our life. Remember our focus to understand the fear, not to give our power away by letting it control us. That should be our focus. And after you have worked through these other steps, hopefully it will be time to let go of the fear. Just what does that encompass? Releasing one's attachment to the past experience and those past events. Releasing the creation of the future, imagining what allows the fear to rise up, and then living in the moment, staying present. It does not mean that you are forcing yourself to get over something horrible. It doesn't mean that you suppress the experience by making yourself forget. Instead, letting go is surrendering painful beliefs. By letting go, you are making space for love, understanding, forgiveness, self-compassion, and to once again be part of your own life. Letting go and surrendering is an essential part of any spiritual journey that you may choose to live. After all, it is our attachment and identification with our thoughts that is the sole cause of our suffering and struggles. In Brazil, they have a Portuguese saying, "Adai," which means "and then." When someone tells a story or shares a hardship, it is the custom of the listener to say, "Adai." Literally, "I" means and "dai" means from there, from a place near you. Put together, "adai" has a the first is, I hear what life is giving you, and so what does this matter? What does this mean for you? The second is, I see where you are, and so what is now in front of you, or what is just beyond where you are? And the third and final meaning of "adai" is, and so what now? What's your next step? What are you gonna do? I love the beauty of this process. Someone being willing to ask the simple question, "adai," that encourages the speaker to look within themselves and then truly listen for the answer. After all, the answer we already know within us. It helps the speaker to avoid overreacting to a situation, and it helps the individual to look at and potentially reframe the experience. And then they can decide how best to take the next step. Actively listening and using these questions and thoughts in mind for yourself or for another person or for you to change the direction of your life. We can easily ask these same questions that they do in Brazil of ourselves when we're faced with a fear, a belief, or an uncomfortable situation. The next time you're facing a fear, remember the simple word, "adai." Say it. "Adai." Again, "adai." Don and his wife were driving along. They were coming home. Milk and bread were in the back of the car, and they were chatting about the dinner they were getting ready to go to that night. They were in their early 30s, looking forward to their life together. As they drove, they were admiring the foliage, and they noticed the reds and yellows and oranges in the leaves, and it was just beautiful and bright against the leaves. A truck driver that was headed towards them was trying as he reached out to find the station. And he swerved unexpectedly. He tried to stop as best he could, but he hit one of the cars going on in the passenger door. The car immediately broke into flames. Don was badly burned. Wife did not survive. After his recovery, Don remarried, and ultimately he had 4 grandkids. And a few years ago, he was driving alone to a nearby lawn stand to get some fresh specialty meals for dinner. In the light of the late summer afternoon brought it was as if his first wife was there, and the light suddenly, and then the explosion that happened again, and began to leave and hold over. All of that memory of that explosion, of that fire that consumed him, that killed his first wife, happened. And for some reason after that, which he could never quite explain, he knew he had to be a truck driver some 40 plus years later. It took a little research and a little time, but ultimately he located, and they agreed to meet in a coffee. And as they sat there in a busy coffee shop sharing that cup of coffee, the old driver began to go, and he began to twist it with his fingers and tear it between the two hands. And it was clear to Don that the driver had never fall out. Finally, Don reached out, took the hand with him, just like it. And the truck driver about Don's age looked down. He had never driven an 18-wheeler again since that fall day. But when they left the coffee shop, they climbed into Don's car. In total silence, they watched the sun go on down. And as they rode along, their hearts slowly opened to each other. In 40 years of history. What's truly important about this story is why Don wanted to be a truck driver. It wasn't just about facing his fears. As he puts it simply, I just had to let him off the hook before we both died. And it was time to look at this. Let go experience from it. So the choice is ours. We can stay in the present moment. We can accept and bless what comes our way. We can surrender and forgive, removing the hooks that bind us. Or we can stay fighting. A poem by Mark Nepo by the title of But How is as follows. It is said that souls intent on living will reach deep into their womb and bring out the fire living there, which out into orphan brings to light. It is said that those intent on making things better will reach deep into their minds and bring out the fire there, which out the open turns to truth. It is said that those who love like me to the Father. This is the truth in my life. This is the truth in yours. And so it is.
We'll have our